Looking at the experimental inoculation data from the CDC COVID data tracker and the vaccine adverse events reporting system. So from the COVID data tracker, we get this information as of July 9th, and you can see all the references are down here, but you get this data of people inoculated. Now, what's really infuriating for me is that there have been 195,000 plus children under 6 inoculated in the United States, even though it's only approved for children 12 and up. So this is right here a criminal act right off the bat. And that there have been 3 deaths associated with it is just infuriating. But when we look at the people inoculated, we look at the reported injuries in these age ranges, it gives us an opportunity to create risk of injury percentages. And then when we compare those risk of injury percentages against potential gain of benefit, it allows us to do a risk versus benefit analysis. So what this does is it tells us the only people that should have access to these experimental COVID biologics are the people where there is a definitive greater benefit than risk. So in the under 6 age range, and this is again incomplete data here, but it's already 3.4 times greater risk than benefit. And I say under 12 here because that's where it's supposed to be. In the 6 to 17 age range, per the CDC COVID data tracker and Vaers, it's a 15.6 times greater risk than benefit. There's no reason that our children should have access to this. They do not need it. Their rate of recovery is 99.989%. You cannot improve on that in medicine, in life. 18 to 39 age range, we know that it's a 0.261% risk of injury. And people will look at this and say, well, yeah, but that's really low. And then I say to them, yeah, but it's not necessary to even take that risk, right? Because what if you're one of these people that died here and the family is left to pick up the pieces, right? They should not have access. It's very simple. You have to be able to definitively show that the benefit exceeds the risk in order to roll out an experimental product for people, and even then it should be by choice only. So in this age range, 18 to 39 is a 3.2 times greater risk than benefit as of July 9th. 40 to 49, it's about equal here. So since it's about equal or equivocal, then there's still no justification, in my opinion, for people in 40 to 49 age range getting the experimental COVID inoculations. Now, to be fair, when we look at data from the 50 to 64 range, 65 to 79 range, and 79 plus range, the data bears out that the benefit potentially exceeds the risk. And this is where I like to show people, I'm not slamming anything. I'm saying let's be objective in our analysis of verifiable data. There's obviously here an argument for saying people 50 and up should have access to the experimental COVID biologics. Should they be mandated? Should they be forced? Should they be coerced? Should they be shamed? No. It should be a choice. But here is a statistical analysis in the United States that shows that there is potentially a greater benefit than risk in these age ranges. But this is the truth that's hiding in plain sight, Jonathan. All this information is right there for the CDC, on the CDC website, for us to be able to analyze it. But what you see on the news is that they don't analyze it. They just pick and choose the bits and pieces of data, and then of course throw in some lies and stuff like that. So
can you share that again? Can you share that again? And just can you tell me now? Is this based off the inflated numbers?
This is what's published by the CDC. Yes, this is based upon what is exactly published. I haven't done any statistical lowering of death counts or anything like that based upon what we suspect is a hyperinflation. This is exact data coming from the CDC.
Well, I can tell you what we'd have to do right now is if it's 600,000 deaths or 500,000 deaths, let's just say versus 30,000. Which is the number that you arrived at based on the calculations of the issue with the comorbidities, right? So then basically it would be, what's that? It's under 10%.
Well, yeah, the reason we can't do this kind of statistical analysis based upon those our suspicion of the hyperinflation of them is because I can't do an analysis like that until I get the CT values for every PCR positive case. Like if we there's a way for us to correct the count. Like one of the things I've been pushing for is to correct the count. If we get a death certificate and we see that obviously like if we do a soft audit on everything, you remove all the obvious stuff that doesn't even need to be debated, right? Then you go to the next level and you start looking at the PCR test, and you want to know, number one, did that person the next thing you would do is go and look at comorbidities, and you would start saying, okay, well, who had 4 or more comorbidities, or 2 or more major comorbidities, right? That's the cause of death. It's not the infection. They were already sick. So the cause of death is the comorbidity, right? That's how we've always done it since at least 2003. And then the last thing we do for whoever's left over, which is a small subset, you would look at their death certificate, you would look at the date of their PCR test, and you would look at the date at the cycle threshold value. If their cycle threshold value is over 28, or if it's been 28 days since they contracted it, you can't say that SARS-CoV-2 virus caused it. You just can't. So correcting the count is super easy. Getting access to the data to correct the count has been problematic. Got it.
And just sharing the screen. Basically, if the count was corrected within any vicinity of the numbers that this would arrive at, sorry if you could share it. To me, it appears that even in these age groups where it appears beneficial, it still would not be. Even in those age groups, based on the recount, because we're playing a rigged game, and so then it makes it. And I know that you don't want to overstate. I'm just saying that if you could speak to that, because I do think that again we are having to run what you've done. You've used their own information against them to say, okay, based on this, here's the outcome. But then we have to kind of have our own thought process around whether we feel like where those numbers should arrive at, and with this hyperinflation, because I think that what people will find is with these other age groups, it creates a higher risk. And wait to see what happens in the flu season coming up with people that have been vaccinated. We're going to see some very temporary benefits. Unfortunately, I hope I'm not right.
I think what we can say definitively, Jonathan, is that this is a mess. This was a mess that never, let me put this on screen again. This is a mess that never had to happen. It happened because people broke the law. And this is why we have laws in place. The Information Quality Act in the United States is specifically about making sure that the quality and integrity of the data that federal agencies are publishing can be verified and is accurate. We cannot make good decisions with bad data, right? I think that would be my quote. We cannot make good decisions with bad data. So the Pfizer clinical trials for the booster was put into effect by the National Institutes of Health in January of this year, and they finished their phase 3 clinical trial a couple days ago on this, which is shocking. We've never seen something go from inception of clinical trial to conclusion of clinical trial in essentially a few months, because once the clinical trial came up in January, they still had to enroll participants. So the clinical trial actually didn't get underway at the earliest until February. So what we're looking at is basically maybe about a 5-month clinical trial, which is insane. Okay, there's no way to confidently assess safety with that. The main Pfizer clinical trial is now scheduled to end May 2nd, 2023. So that's where some of that confusion comes in, where people are saying, well, the Pfizer clinical trial is over. No, the booster clinical trial is concluded, and concluded far too rapidly, in my opinion. The main Pfizer clinical trial is still ongoing, as are the AstraZeneca and the, not the AstraZeneca, the Johnson & Johnson and the Moderna National Institutes of Health clinical trial as well. Clinical trials are not going to end in the United States until late 2022 and early and mid 2023. So we still have a substantial amount of time where long-term data is going to be collected, and I still think that the long-term data they're collecting should extend to 5, 6, even 10 years for something like this, and not be relegated to 3 years, basically a 3-year time frame. I think that's far too short. Yeah, the clinical trials, the first thing is most clinical trials fail. So I think that's the first thing. Clinical trials can be shut down, terminated for one death. We know there were many, I don't want to say many, but there were multiple deaths in the clinical trial, in the Pfizer clinical trial, and the Moderna NIH clinical trial. But for some reason, they kept pushing them forward. The big problem we have with this situation right now is the FDA and CDC have suppressed safe and effective treatments for the COVID infection. And the reason they did that was because if there are safe and effective treatments that have approval, even under EUA, it eliminates the experimental gene therapy. You cannot have an experimental product accessible by millions of Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans, if there is a safe and effective treatment that is established. So that's the why of that. The why of that was they wanted to get this experimental inoculation to market. They wanted to get it there as fast as possible and present it as the only solution, the single solution, because this is going in line with the globalist agenda for controlling mass amounts of people and profiting off of that control. And I'd like to take things back to a simple thought process: right and wrong. What is going on right now, what has been done by key people in the CDC, the FDA, the administrations, both the previous one and the current one, is wrong. And we have to have the courage to be able to call it what it is, and that's what many of us are doing right now, and paying to do that as well. And it's I'm not going to back down from any of this. So I'm in it till we win.